Hello, podcasters. Welcome back. And I'm really happy to announce that Progress Theory is now expanding. And we've just started the Progress Theory Legend Series, where we will be interviewing legends from the worlds of sport, science, and sports science and hearing their inspirational stories. Now, I'm really happy that our first legend on this series is a very close friend of mine, S&C coach Ben Lonergan. And he's got a wealth of experience to share with you today as he discusses his transition from teaching and professional athlete, leading all the way up to being an S&C coach for the England women's and men's sevens teams. And he's travelled the world with both sevens and tens rugby. Now, I know you will love this podcast because Ben is probably one of the most charismatic and funny people that I know. But before you get on and listen, please follow us on Instagram at progress theory_. Follow us on YouTube, and please like and leave a comment. We love doing these podcasts and we're constantly trying to improve. So any feedback is greatly welcomed. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, here is Ben Lonergan. Right, we're in. Okay, I actually, as we started this podcast, as this is the first Progress Theory Legends podcast, I wanted to introduce you properly. And you obviously know that. What was it you said on my wedding day? Get my name in your wedding speech, which I did. So you've got a number of nicknames. I'm just going to announce you properly. So the Colombian drug lord El Lono, Vincent Van Loners, the artist Nicky Lonage, Professor Benatoli Londerchuk. Loners. So I've just got at the end, it's Loners. But Ben, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Phil. Nice to join you. Nice to see you.
Yeah, it's the last time we've spoken a bit on the phone recently, but I remember in particular, it must have been 4 or 5 weeks ago, I saw a picture of you on Instagram where it was just you with a mask heading to Bermuda. I was like, what is going on? I'd love to start there because the stuff you were putting on Instagram looked incredible. So what were you doing out in Bermuda?
Yeah, so I'll be honest, it was all a bit of a last minute trip. So lucky enough, I know the Sevens boys had been made contacts by an organisation, a group of people who wanted to basically start an international tens tournament. And this was sort of a trial tournament, one of the first of its kind. And I know that the Sevens guys, especially with sort of what's going on in the world at the moment and with a pause on the World Seven Series, with the MLR in America not started yet, Major League Rugby, and this was sort of a good opportunity to sort of fill the void and create a bit of a niche market for the boys to be able to get some rugby opportunity. Lucky enough, Dan Norton put me in touch with one of the organisers, and yeah, I jumped at the chance. Obviously, with the Sevens being made redundant back in July, then obviously to jump at a chance to head to Bermuda and get back into some sort of elite rugby, then I had to jump at the chance.
Right, it looks absolutely quality. What were you working with a particular team out there, or was it a number of the 10 teams?
Yeah, so no, I was like a S&C / manager for the Asia Pacific Dragons, which was like incredible.
Good name.
So I've heard the name of the team before. They've done sort of quite a few invitational tournaments. A complete mix of different cultures, a lot of Polynesian guys, a lot of players from the States, a lot of players from sort of Tonga, Fiji, Samoa. We had a couple of Hawaiian individuals on there, a couple of English guys. So yeah, it was a very eclectic blend of different characters, which made it all the more enjoyable. But to have it in Bermuda, I've never been Bermuda before. I don't think I'll ever be able to afford to go again. But the place was unbelievable. Country was amazing. People were incredible. Like the views there, it was what I needed. It certainly needed a little mental break.
Certainly getting away from England with this COVID situation.
Yeah, it's just unfortunate that it didn't start 2 weeks later, so I could have come back and missed the whole of lockdown, which would have been nice. But Tan's faded already. Stepped off the plane, gone.
Is there, I don't know too much about the 10 series. Is that something that's looking to really progress and
Yes,
develop into something as big as what the Sevens was.
well, they obviously play a Big Tens tournament once a year in Hong Kong, and sort of this, like I said, it was sort of a trial event to see. It was broadcast on Sky and ESPN, which is always nice. Setup was brilliant for how sort of last minute it was, but they're looking to definitely make it bigger and better as the years go on. So I think they're looking to franchise every team out, have sort of maybe between 8 and 10 teams involved, have 4 different locations, and sort of make it a bit more sort of worldwide. I mean, for those who saw pictures of everyone who was in Bermuda, I think that's a massive driving force, and people will certainly be interested at some of the locations that they've got planned for potentially next year. And you know, a massive shout out to the organisers of that, Sam and Halle, who ran some of the tournament logistics and were a big part of the Asia Pacific Dragons team as well, and making my experience immense.
So hopefully when the next one starts, you'll be heading back out either Bermuda or wherever they're going to host the next one to coach the same team.
Well, hopefully I did a good enough job to be invited again. I'd love to. So yeah, I'd be feel privileged and definitely very, very keen to be involved in that international 10 series again.
Yeah, we've jumped in like on your recent experiences, but clearly it's obvious to tell just from that you've got a complete wealth of experience at coaching at international level. I've also assumed that everyone knows your certain nicknames, but you are Ben Lonergan. We haven't actually introduced your full name yet. But I wanted to give an opportunity to you to explain like your progress through like your S&C history. Like, where did you start off with, and where did it all start with? And it's ultimately ended up with you coaching at the highest level of international rugby sevens. Where did all this start?
Started at a beautiful place which is known as St Mary's University, I guess. So all familiar with that. And obviously, for those who don't know, me and Phil were in the same year at uni as well. So we've known each other a long time. I think 2005 was when it started at St Mary's. Did my undergrad degree in sports rehabilitation. Really enjoyed that. Some amazing lecturers on as part of that program. And in terms of sort of nationwide, I think St Mary's is a fairly established program for sports rehabilitation, as it is for strength and conditioning as well that you lecture on, Phil. And then after that, I was actually playing full-time rugby for a couple of years post that at London Scottish, whilst doing a sort of just a bit of personal training along the side. During that time, got offered a teaching role at Bromley College, which was a unique experience in itself. At the time was fairly rough college, but learnt a tremendous amount. This was sort of lecturing or teaching, whatever you want to call it, within sort of the BTEC sports program there. Alongside that, I coached some of the rugby athletes at the college and some of the football athletes. From that, where did I go from there? So alongside that, at that time as well, I was also working at Planet Scottish, working for Richmond Women. So this was my first start at Richmond Women, where they were sort of the powerhouse at the time of women's rugby. And this was before the sort of newly formed Allianz Premiership or Women's Premiership was available. So you had teams full of sort of international players. And again, this was before professional contracts for women came on board. So you had lots of athlete and female athletes, getting up at 5, 6 in the morning to do their training, go to work for a full day, coming home and finishing their other session off that they had to compete with. So, huge kudos to them. And that was a privilege to be involved with Karen Finlay, who's now at Harlequins and the Harlequins women's head coach. I was involved in Scotland for a period of time. Sort of then after lecturing at Bromley College, got offered a lecturing job at Merriswood College, which I was there for like 4 or 5 years. Alongside sort of Merriswood, ended up going back and playing for Richmond. Ended up through that time at Merriswood College. I think it might have been towards the end of at Merriswood College. I actually taught with Paul Reed for a very short stint of time before he moved on and done some amazing stuff.
Yeah, the big guy.
He's now
I miss Paul.
Yeah, obviously very well respected sort of practitioner and academic now. So
he's moved to UCL now.
Oh, is he?
Yeah, he's in the UK because he was at Spire, wasn't he?
That's it.
Did
Yeah.
loads of research out there. Now he's moved to UCL, so hopefully more collaborations in the near future if he's in the UK.
Yeah, definitely a person to keep an eye on for those interested. Then from Maris Wood, ended up starting my masters in, I think, in my last year there. Then met a guy called Tom Farrow. So Tom Farrow, who is the lead S&C for the men's program within the Sevens, and owns a company called sort of Arete Performance. They cover sort of a whole range of of different what's the word, services, moving from sort of elite athletic performance to schools to youth athletes. So met him, got on board with sort of Tom's company, Tom's concepts. Sort of, I see sort of Tom as a bit of a mentor to myself. Um, then from there, Arete took over sort of the physical performance management at Richmond. So I'd sort of left the Richmond women's and stuff for a short stint of time, come back on board with Arete, was working across the men's who were in the championship women's programs. Then moved to St Mary's to lecture on the sports rehab program that I was once a student of. Completed my masters. From then, previous to this as well, when I was at Maris Wood, I did a couple of I did 2 or 3 pre-season camps with London Irish in the Premiership. So Rob Palmer, who was the lead S&C there, who's probably another mentor of mine, and probably one of the reasons why I actually got involved with enjoying training. So I met Rob at St Mary's as a student. He also did the sports rehab program, and he was like the strongest guy at St Mary's at the time. Little pineapple chunk type build, and gone on to be sort of international powerlifter, holding numerous sort of Great British records and stuff. And he sort of grew my love. We had a lovely little training group at St Mary's. So myself, him, Jamal, Adi Milak. You're sure you remember him, Phil?
I remember the group. That old gym at St Mary's was brilliant. Like the floor wasn't flat, and everything was a proper dungeon. But that gym was amazing.
Well, actually, going back to my time at St Mary's, I've missed a big part. So the EIS used to be based at St Mary's with like Dan Cleather, Nick Cooper. These were all practitioners with the EIS at the time with athletes. So as well as training at St Mary's, I used to spend pretty much all my time in the gym, just because you got to watch sort of practitioners in action with elite sports, men and women, Olympic sports as well. So I think that was a huge learning opportunity for me, that I would just sit and watch these practitioners coach athletes. I'd speak to them, I'd ask them questions, and they were very open about it. I mean, for those who know Dan Clever, being open, probably 2 words that don't go together. But at that time, it was a brilliant learning opportunity to learn from those guys, and they had some sort of very open athletes. So really nice to engage with those, and that was a huge learning opportunity around sort of training with Rob. Where were we on my story? Oh yeah, the pre-season camps at London Irish. So that was obviously some of my first exposure to the professional, elite environment of sport, especially sort of rugby union. And then from that, obviously going into Richmond men and women, got offered the assistant role with England men's sevens to work alongside Tom, because Tom went from assistant role to lead role when Dan Howes, who was lead of the England sevens, moved to America to take up a really good strength and conditioning coordinator role with the Houston Astros. And then
he's back in the UK as well, isn't he?
Yeah, I think he's coming back. So what's that? Sorry,
is heading back our way.
COVID, strange time.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was an amazing opportunity. I'm sure we'll get on to more about the Sevens stuff, but the men's and women's program at the Sevens is, an incredibly special environment. People there are all amazing. Not only the players, the staff, or all the performance staff. It really is a special place, and it was a huge learning opportunity for myself. And Tom obviously trusted, my skills and experiences enough to, I was sort of in charge of looking after some of the rehabbers and long-term rehabbers, and the athletes that, got left behind when not selected from the World Series. So built some really sort of close relationships from that. From that as well, I then got employed to be the lead role for the women, from going from the assistant to men's program. And then, it takes me to this current day. I did also go back to London Irish to do a bit of consultancy work, to do some of their sort of speed development stuff in the year that they sort of got promoted from the championship, which was quite nice, actually. To not just be an intern, but actually get paid for some of your services in more of sort of a consultant role. So that was good. And then through that time as well, and through Arete, sort of, worked with numerous different athletes from different sports. Currently at the moment, obviously, while I'm on a bit of a hiatus, built up quite a strong client base, working with a few individuals from the Premiership in terms of looking after some of their sort of their rehab side of things for those who need a little more care, and working with some of the everyday population, which is quite nice. Gone back to working with a non-elite population of people who either just want to move better, get a bit more conditioned, want to start a bit of training, or actually have some sort of goals, like signed up for a 10K and they need to get conditioned to complete that. And then also from all the women's sort of experience within rugby, was lucky enough to get invited to do one of the tours for the women's Barbarians, which was awesome. So I did that at Twickenham against England. And that day, actually, I also had to switch across to the men's England team as well, and had to just do a bit of game day cover in terms of one of the S&C roles as well. And they must have thought, who is this guy just rocking up in full England stuff, all us up for an international match against the Barbarians? So that was good.
Was it a quick change of jacket?
It was literally. I ran to the England change room and put the kit on. Robin Eager, who's the Pathway Lee's strength and conditioning coach at the RFU, he couldn't do that day, so I asked if I was available to do it. So I was lucky enough to cover him. And then obviously through all the contacts, been invited to work as part of that international tens tournament, and experience some amazing times with the Asia Pacific Dragons as well. And then I guess it leads us to what we're on at the moment.
Yeah. I always remember the stories you tell about just how much you were enjoying working with the England Sevens, both men and women's. And you must have really, the culture must have been so strong there, because even though they've been changing at the Sevens at the moment, you're still in contact, you're still doing work with the players. And ultimately it was Dan Norton that got you involved with the tens thing. So you must have made such an impression that you still work with them despite there's been changes in the Sevens system at the moment.
Yeah, I think luckily the role that sort of Tom put me in, and some of the responsibilities that Tom gave me in terms of sort of leading on some of the, or working in collaboration with some of the physios there, such as Emily and Remy at the time. Like Remy has been a huge influence to me in how he's worked with some of them individuals, and then obviously with the women's program with Izzy. But I think that time where you're working as more of a rehab practitioner and more of a one-on-one nature, or certainly very small groups with individuals, is a really amazing time to really build a relationship with those. And there's always that professional boundary between staff and athlete that you become so close that they almost become sort of your friends in a way, because you want what's best for them. You get to know them, you get to know their whys and why they're doing what they're doing. And then it's, how do you communicate differently with those individuals? How do you tailor the rehab according to those individuals, of not only what is needed in terms of sort of a physical sense, but in terms of almost what's going to make them more mentally able to deal with the struggle that is the rehabilitation process. And that, I think, even now, women's programs a little different at the moment, because they're all busy playing for clubs, playing international rugby. But certainly, still working alongside Tom and with some of the guys at the moment who don't have clubs, and are still building towards what hopefully is Tokyo 2021. So the dream is still not over.
What is going on with the Sevens? With COVID, there were some changes, wasn't there, that didn't seem to affect the 15s game, but affected the Sevens game. But there's still the hope of getting to Tokyo next year. What's going on?
So obviously with COVID and lack of fans, basically the RFU were losing sort of a huge amount of financial gain from not being able to have fans at each game. And they had to make some savings. It's just a business decision, and part of that was to make the Sevens program redundant. You sort of understand that decision. kind of, because obviously there's not going to be sevens till the new year, and no one knew how long this was going to last or what sort of financial burden. And so, yeah, they made the sevens program redundant. Obviously, what the future holds, we currently don't know. The RFU have been given, some government funding. Whether or not that has an impact on the sevens, I don't know. But what does still stand is that the group of individuals. So I know the girls had one GB camp. The boys didn't quite manage to just timelines have one. But the goal still stands of that same group of individuals still searching to medal at Tokyo 2021. As far as I'm concerned as a practitioner, so, I was lucky enough to interview for that role and was given the opportunity to be the S&C for the women's team GB. Mm-hmm. Whether or not that still stands, if we're still waiting to find out. There's a lot of sort of moving parts behind the scenes at the moment, I think, in order to try and, get some sort of sevens program up and running. What that looks like, no one knows. But that's still the players' dreams and ambition, as is some of the staff that were involved.
I'm guessing they're really, it's the same group of players, and from that they want the same staff still working together sort of on the side to try and make this dream a reality.
Who knows, Phil? Your guess is as good as mine at the moment. I'd like to think so.
Yeah, definitely. You never know that Boris might be listening to this podcast. Send some money.
Boris, if you're out there, yeah. Yeah. Or yeah, hopefully.
What were the key things that you noticed that were different when working with the men's team and then working with the women's team? Because you really well described like developing really strong coach-athlete relationships, and it sounds like, from everything you tell me, like one of the biggest successes of the team and the successes of a coach and your performance as a coach is your ability to do that, and you do it so well. But are there any differences that you have to make when working with the women's team and the men's team? Are there differences in cultures, which means your approach changes slightly?
I certainly found the transition into the women's program probably my most difficult challenge to date. The reason being is that the practitioner who was there before me, Katie James, very, very experienced practitioner, really well respected. The girls loved her. So, like, they're big shoes to fill. So coming into any environment where, their previous sort of lead S&C was that well liked, was that that well respected is tough. So, there were some challenges there. A lot of the girls were amazing, to be fair, with welcoming me in. Few different changes that I had, and lucky for me that the coaching staff had recently changed as well. So Charlie Hayter had taken over from James Bailey as head coach. So we collaborated, fairly well, and had similar views and visions on what was needed to make this group of individuals, certainly competing with the world's best and trying to be the world's best sevens team. And then obviously developing that relationship with Isabel Freeman, so Izzy, the physio, and making sure that we're working really collaborative together, using the same terminology, language, like that was really important. There's definitely I think in working with any men's and women's environment, it's all going to be on an individual basis, but there are certain, generalizations that you can make based on sort of research, psychological understanding of differences between men and women that are obviously going to be prevalent in those different, different groups. So, like, certainly for me, I'm actually reading a book called Top Dog at the moment. I don't know if you've seen it, by Paul Anson, and there's a lot of stuff in there talking about male and female differences. So, like a few are. So, if you look at like intellectual function, men tend to be sort of quite linear. And I think this is from the work of, is it Cunningham and Roberts, who did like a study for UK sport looking at men and women differences and how perhaps you would coach them.
Yeah,
women have this sort of whole picture or whole brain perspective where they need to know where each little piece of the puzzle fits in that bigger overall picture. Whereas men tend to be just like, okay, yeah, fine, and get on with it. Whereas, women athletes tend to ask, or female athletes tend to ask a few more questions, which is great because it really, really challenges you as a practitioner, and you really have to give, an explanation and understanding of why you're doing something. and perhaps at times, there was times where I probably wasn't so good at that, and that's good reflection points that, for me, working in a female environment, you need to give clarity and some sort of story of where this fits in and how that's going to impact each individual's performance. I think certainly like an initial instinctive reaction, if you come across conflict, for example, is that men have that fight or flight, so they react in alarm and aggression and action. Whereas if there's sort of conflict within a woman's environment, they tend to rely more on sort of those relationships and more of a feeling. And what was it said? I did actually write a note down here somewhere. And this was from that Top Dog book, that a lot of studies they've done in women, they put relationships before competing, and they put that before competing at the expense of disrupting a relationship. Where in a men's environment, it's solely on competition and competition only. Whereas a lot of factors that you need to take into consideration for a female environment is that a lot of the important stuff, and to an extent, I massively agree with this, and I don't necessarily think it's a difference between men's and women's environment, because certainly the men's sevens environment, there was a massive emphasis on those relationships and that building of relationships as well. And I think that's why the environment was such a special place.
Do you think, because you had such experience working with female rugby players at Richmond for many years, do you think all the experience there really helped and made the transition going from the men's to the women's teams much easier? And I'm guessing, I think a lot of the female players knew who you were already, didn't they? Or had worked with other female athletes that know them. So you came with a really good reputation and a lot of experience. Do you think that really helped? Or did it even make things a bit more challenging?
I think with some of them it helped. I think with some it was a bit of a hindrance, maybe, because people have these natural biases and they develop their own perception of someone without actually having to know or having worked with them. I think naturally wherever you go, like same as me, like you hear names, you like before going to work with these specific individuals, you hear stories about them, you find out a little more information about them. And I think, you do build up a picture, and hopefully, over time you can either enhance that reputation or you can diminish some of the negative thoughts that perhaps they had towards you as a practitioner. But yeah, no, it definitely did help. And having a lot of experience within that within women's rugby did aid that as well. And one of the biggest learning lessons as well was that Barbars experience, where we had a lot of players from sort of New Zealand, and the Black Ferns are arguably the most successful team in world rugby, between them and England, and to hear some of their sort of experiences and stories and how they perceive English rugby players and how they perceive why they think that they're better than England was really interesting.
Are you allowed to say what they were saying?
Oh,
they think they were better.
I think they just. I think some of the Black Ferns girls that I spoke to believed that they were more instinctive. They were better rugby players. They were more instinctive. They said that England were, very well drilled, very well structured. But when the game broke up and it became, using instinct, that England weren't so good at that, and that they were the better team. And just from where they've grown up and their basic skill set, then that's where they excelled. I think that's changing though. Like I think certainly now there's a whole ton more young girls out there playing rugby. I think there's more opportunity. I think certainly from some of the performance aspects, now girls from such a young age at school have S&C provision. So actually their training age becomes a lot greater when they start to get into these sort of senior teams. But I think certainly some of the coaching as well throughout the levels is improving. So I think slowly over time you'll start to see a big influx and a bigger pool of talented rugby players that you can pick from. But I still have views over women's 15s and 7s as well. So
In what way?
So, like for me, it's hard because you've got New Zealand, England, who are the two dominant forces in women's 15s. You've got France, who are obviously a very competitive side. And then after that, there's still a bit of a gap, between the competitive nature of other nations and, those three nations. And I think that's slowly closing. Like, every women's team is improving year on year. Like Ireland are getting a lot more competitive now. Wales, hopefully with new head coach Warren Abrahams at the helm, will start to develop and improve.
I saw that on Instagram. That was recent, wasn't it?
Yeah, amazing coach, like a incredible thinker, very cerebral type coach. So hopefully he'll do wonders for them. But yeah, there still is that gap. Whereas a lot of sevens teams, some of the best athletes within each nation have gone to play sevens. So some of the best players within New Zealand, Australia, they all play for their sevens nations. So, some of the competition between teams within the sevens circuit is far greater. So any team can beat anyone on their day. And I think that's probably some of the nature of sevens as a game anyway. But certainly seeing some of the sevens players now get reintroduced to some of the respective nations within some of the 15s competition, you've suddenly seen a bit of a difference in terms of the tempo the game is played at. Some of the loose style of play. Certainly watching England-France last weekend, some of France's offloads and then the way that they were throwing it about with some of the introduction of some of their sevens players, I think has definitely been a benefit to the 15s games. And maybe I'm biased and I enjoy watching some of the sevens girls put on that England 15 shirt, but I definitely think it's been for a positive.
Yeah, I'm certainly more competition will drive higher quality, and if the higher quality is in the sevens circuit, just because of the way it's all structured, or the more experienced players are heading to the sevens, then it's going to increase competition, which is going to increase quality on the pitch.
Within the seven, they'd like. You watch any of the women's sevens games, and they're just all incredible athletes. Like they all have to be able to move well. They all have to be quick. They all have to be, fit and be able to run all day. Even some of the collisions now, not just on the female circuit, but the men's circuit as well. I mean, you've got 110 kilo men being able to run at like 10, 11 meters per second, which is scary.
What would you think is needed to say, you said more opportunities are happening in the UK, better coaching is happening at more grassroots level. That's going to create a bigger pool of players. So automatically that's going to lead to better players sort of filtering through. What kind of key things do you think need to be addressed during those development years, which you think would improve that instinct, which the New Zealanders clearly think they have the upper hand with?
I don't know. I guess that's more of a question for a coach, but I think especially the way that sort of strength and conditioning as a profession is moving as well. There's a lot more scope for needing to have an understanding of like some of your skill acquisition based, theories and some of the science around that. And I think there's certainly ways of increasing skill development, and that's typical, having a link on sort of the technical, tactical, some of the psychological aspects of performance, and being able to have a bit of an input with that. All that stuff around sort of varied gameplay, around movement variability. Like you see a lot of I guess physical education in schools at the moment, and there's no real purpose to it. There's no real drive. Like there's no real understanding of how to constrain a particular environment to get like a desired outcome. So I think if it can start at sort of school level, with some of the teachers having a better understanding of how to structure certain, like Ian Taplin, who's now the sort of I don't know what you call it, co-owner of Arete Performance with Tom. He runs some of the physical literacy stuff at RGS High Wycombe, and I know Arete have sort of plotted at a few other schools now. But some of the influence that he's had there has been incredible in terms of like educating young players around efficient movement, around building certain physical capacities to be able to allow them to express themselves more within sort of a PE-based environment, around teaching them just fundamentals around managing their own body, managing another body, building, basic skills of falling, rolling, jumping, sprinting, basic running, sprinting mechanics, all that stuff that gets introduced, that when they get put on the field of play, they have a massive toolbox of movement variability that they can then select from. James, I listened to an amazing talk by James Moore. So he was what I actually forgot the name of what you call it. Who's the person who's basically in charge of performance at the Olympics? So it was in 2016, like I can't
director or
no, it's a mission de
I don't know this.
Mission did something or other. But anyway, he's an amazing practitioner, like worked some of the best athletes in the world. Anyway, did an amazing talk on his new company that he's set up, a performance company. I think it's health development and something or other. Anyway, he was talking about how players who get less injured are normally the ones that can express like huge amounts of movement variability. And I think certainly that can be transformed into not only the women's game, but to sort of the men's game from a younger age. Sorry, I waffled on there.
Probably. No. I
didn't answer the question at all. So,
no, I think you highlight such a key aspect of what's happening with this cultural change. We're seeing on the Masters at St Mary's, more and more PE teachers are coming to do the S&C Masters. So they clearly want to know some certain skills so they can apply in their PE sessions. And then on top of that, you've got other schools which employ people like Tappers with a retail, or you've got Andy Jones at Lions, where S&C coaches are going in to teach those skill sets that can then transfer to all of the schools. So, and this is done in such a fun and entertaining way. So it's really engaging and students are really taking part in with it. So all of a sudden, I reckon in 3 or 4 years, these students would have gone through 4 or 5 years of this training. And then when they start to specialize in a particular sport that they love, like ultimately they're going to be in a much better position to reach that elite level, not only because they have the physical qualities to do so, but like you said, if they have a better movement literacy toolbox, it probably means they're going to be less likely to get injured. So that means they would have practiced their sport for longer. So all of a sudden you've got better athletes reaching the top end. So
yeah, and like there goes like years ago, you have to diminish that standardized thought process of, okay, boys play football at school, girls play netball. Like that's for me, that's complete bollocks. Like there should be no sexual boundaries on what sports you compete in, especially sort of at a really young age in terms of specialization. Give the opportunity to play everything, to learn the skills, different skill sets from every different sport that you can then pick and choose when you do, eventually maybe go and start to specialize in something.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, there's a really, I think it's a guy on Twitter called Jeremy Frisch who does loads of really cool youth development stuff, and he'd be a good person to go and have a little look at on Twitter. Post some really cool stuff out and videos and stuff, so you can see some of his ideas put into practice.
Yeah, definitely. Any listeners that haven't heard of Jeremy Frisch, check his stuff out. He puts loads of videos online, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think that's his name. I'm really bad with names and stuff. So
FRISCH, something like that.
Yeah.
I think so. This is a question for those that kind of want to reach the heights that you've got to. So you've gone from, working in schools, you've gone from working with a number of different rugby clubs, and then you've reached the point where you're at the coaching at the elite level, working with international athletes. What would be your recommendation to anyone that wants to reach the level of working with international athletes, and maybe even particular
make lots of friends? I think certainly one thing I've realised at the moment, and I know Keir Vernon flat bangs on about this, but he was like, I've never heard of anyone to get a job who doesn't know someone at that institution, which I think is probably quite true and quite prevalent, especially in this time where, certainly elite sport at the moment, budgets are constantly strained. There's less opportunity. So, people are going to hire people they like, people are going to hire people they know or have had a positive recommendation from. Obviously, you have to know your stuff and be a good practitioner. But ultimately, if someone doesn't know you or you're not a good person, then the likelihood of you getting that role are very slim. And I think that's one thing I probably didn't do well on in my early years was actually building those relationships, reaching out to people, making an effort to go and visit places, to go and speak to people. And I know Keir's talked a lot about this publicly on social media, but there are ways of doing that, not just to message someone and go, give me a job, or let's go for it's a bit more tactical than that. But I think certainly job opportunities in elite sport are going to be very very hard to attain at the moment. So I think it's what relationships can you start to develop? What skills do you not have where you can start to build? I mean, this is an amazing time for the amount of webinars I've tried to watch to upskill myself over this period. I mean, I was watching one before I came on the call with you, and to actually use this time effectively. I also think as well, if there's not those opportunities in elite sport, look at other avenues of working, whether it's working in sort of school or education institutions. Is it working more in the health industry and having an impact through that? Is it developing your own business? So even if you are lucky enough to get those opportunities in elite sport, you have sort of a secondary income, so you're not completely reliant. If you do get made redundant or another pandemic strikes and you lose your job, that you do have some sort of income on the side helping you with that. So I think all those factors are important, especially the world we live in at the moment. No one knows what's going to happen. So
yeah, almost seems that most coaches now, even if they are working with elite athletes at international level, they're also still working with the general population.
Yeah, I think.
I mean, I know it's like seen as side hustle, but I think a lot of them, they do the money from the side hustle, but they do it to still enhance their coaching skills.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have like a huge variety of people you coach. But again, the unfortunate reality is that the money's tight, and money, from us as an industry and profession, are never going to earn the money that you would going into the city and becoming like an oil broker or something like that. So it's like, how do you then supplement that with your skill set? And that's why I think you see a lot more people leaving professional sport and starting up their own business to try and create something for the future. Because elite sport lasts, a short time.
Yeah, if you've got new coaching staff, they bring their staff with them, and like you could have not done anything wrong, but all of a sudden you're out the door.
Well, you could be the best practitioner in the world, but if a new coach comes in any institution, I'm sure Matt Springham at St Mary's will tell you a bit more about sort of the football world and his experience with that. But that's even more brutal. If they've got a coaching team that they like, then they're coming with them. There you go. There's a word of wisdom. Make friends with a really good coach.
No, it's good. It's good. I wanted to ask a few questions around teaching, because you've got quite a vast experience of teaching at different levels, obviously at FE and at HE, so further education and higher education. What do you notice are the main differences between, say, teaching and coaching?
I knew you were going to ask me this.
Are they just very similar, or do you prefer one over the other? And have reasons for that?
I think some of the similarities. So, teaching now not so much, because some of the group sizes are humongous. So, like I remember in my last year that I was at St Mary's with the rehab students, we had a cohort that year of 100. My ability to remember 100 names in the year is very poor. But I think that certainly that relationship development between athletes, between students, is really important, especially when you get to work a bit closer with certain students, for example, on like a dissertation project, a research project, or something like this, or it might be some of your tutors, with some of the more pastoral care based stuff. So I think certainly the relationship element is a big factor. And again, like, I know I use relationship in a broad term, but I hate people who see someone and they go, yeah, how's your weekend? But don't actually care about any of the smaller details. Just like if you can remember something, even if it's a small detail, go, oh, you were seeing your mum at the weekend, right? Yeah, how was that? Was it like just something that's going to make it a little bit more specific? And that person suddenly thinks, Jesus, like, how did they remember that? They care. So I think those little things are really important. I think the way that you are with a student and an athlete, my thought is that if you can make yourself redundant in some way, then you've done your job. So for an athlete, if you can educate them enough to be able to, know what they're doing when they go into a gym or on a pitch, they're still going to ask you questions about certain things, but they have a really good understanding of how to look after their own body, how to manage themselves. And the same as students, when students suddenly grasp some concepts that they can start to go and learn for themselves, and some even end up having a higher understanding of a subject than you do, then that's a really good place for you to be in as a lecturer or a practitioner.
Mm.
But I do think, like, you are an educator within an athletic population as you are with students as well. I think that's a big role.
Mm.
Again, when you're within the role, I used to do a lecture on coaching and talk about. I used to do it to rehab students, talk about as a rehab practitioner, but same as an S&C. Like as an S&C, you're a coach educator. You're a psychologist in some respect, because you spend a lot of time with the players. You spend a lot of time with some students, and they start to open up, tell you some personal details that perhaps is a little bit out of your remit. It's just like, how do you then maybe speak to the relevant staff to help them through this process and some of the difficult times which they were going. And then obviously that relationship with a coach and enabling to develop the players, but also relationship with your colleagues. So how do you work together to bring on a student cohort, student population, or individual student? So I think those are some of the similarities. Obviously, the difference is that there's a lot more students than there are players, so you can't develop that closeness, you can't get to know them as well. Obviously, I guess certainly in St Mary's, there was the hardest thing for me within that institution was that you're trying to develop students, to have a specific skill set to go and become employable, right?
Mm.
But obviously, within any education establishments, you're limited by resources. You're limited by the powers that be that above you, of like what's in the actual best interest for the students and how we're going to develop a really employable individual. And I think certainly within some occasions, there's certain skill sets which they need to know within an educational institution that you just can't deliver, because either you don't have the equipment and resources available, you don't have the expertise within your staffing population to be able to deliver that. And that was always a real struggle, I think, because ultimately the world of work, especially if it's going to be an elite sport, is so competitive that how do you educate these young students and individuals to go out and become employable? I'm just waffling now, so apologies for that.
No, I can definitely have the sentiment of, I sympathise with, we definitely had the same type of struggles, didn't we, when we were teaching together. We had this idea of we want to try and impart all of our knowledge onto our students to the point where, like you said, make yourself redundant. Like it feels like if the student doesn't know as much or more than I do, then I have failed my role as an educator. That's always been my aim, but you're always limited by certain other factors. And I guess when it comes to a coaching role, because it allows you to be a bit more one-on-one and develop a bit more of a closer relationship, you can have more resources or more time to be able to get around the things that may be affecting that. So you then ultimately develop a better coach-athlete relationship just because of the environment. The only real difference here is like how you give information is a little bit different. So you've got like lecture theatre or practical versus one-on-one coaching, and the actual content itself. But apart from that,
I think as well, like, and there were some people at St Mary's which were amazing at this, and some not. And again, I hear stories of some people who are amazing in this within a elite environment. But I think it's really important to not swim in your own natural bias and have an understanding of where your limitations may be. I think you should always go and seek the expertise of potential areas that you have no idea about, in order to deliver either what's best for the athlete or what's best for the student. So, like, rather than just making something random up, or not having an idea on that, or wanting sole control of that element of a program or module or lecture or whatever that may be, that you need to have some sort of humility and being able to understand where your weaknesses are, and go, and if you don't know the answers, go and find someone who does know the answers. And that's not only going to help your development as a practitioner or lecturer, that's going to certainly help the students or athlete as well. And I think certainly you look at a university environment, how much different expertise are in different departments and how poorly they're utilized together. So I think certainly, like, that collaboration between sort of different departments, not only in a university institution, but also making sure you've got that really strong relationship between a coach, a medical staff, a doctor, a skills coach. One thing that, sorry, I'm waffling, but one thing within the rehab setting is I've never understood why you don't engage the coach in the rehab process, because you're trying to put them back on a pitch, deliver a certain task, right? And obviously that last bit of the rehab puzzle is going to be based around the skills that they have to deliver with on a pitch. Now, the coaches have a brilliant eye for that kind of stuff. That's why they're rugby coaches. So how can we involve the coaches in that rehab process to allow them players to grow and develop, so that when we put them back on the pitch, they're not hesitating, and they are ready for that return to performance rather than just return to sport or run around.
So the interdisciplinary, all your interpersonal skills are so essential for improving that interdisciplinary team.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, yeah, definitely. Do you think it's changed quite a bit? So it used to be like sports rehab and S&C was so separate. Now they're sort of working together a little bit, and the people see it as a bit more of a continuum, where you've got an injured athlete who'd probably be a bit more with the sports rehabbers, and then you've got someone that's 100% healthy and is doing this S&C work each week, probably a bit more with the S&C coach, and it's kind of a continuum. And certain coaches probably specialize in a certain area, but they know the entire continuum. But the best way of knowing that entire continuum is actually having a team of people that can take people from one end to the other. And I think that's getting better with S&C coach and rehabbers. Is that happening overall? Like the psychologist coming in, the nutritionist coming in, the sports coach coming in. Is that done better in sports environments rather than in universities, I guess?
Well, I mean, I can only speak for some of the environments that I've visited or been in or worked in, but there's, I think, for me, like, I love being involved from day one. I have a firm picture, so yeah, it might predominantly be led by sort of either the doctor or physio or surgeon or something to start with. But I think it's really good for an S&C to still have some sort of knowledge and be involved from that early process, because eventually it's going to be on a scale, isn't it? Like, you're going to slowly have transition points where you're going to have more of an influence going through that sort of rehab process. But I think to formulate a plan and to go through that journey needs to happen together. I've listened to so many podcasts of practitioners where they talk amazing game, and they say, yeah, this is what we do. Don't want to be in silos. We want to make sure we work together as a multidisciplinary team, do this. But then I've spoke to athletes in those environments and it hasn't happened.
Really?
The physios have led something. They've not spoke to the S&C. The S&C has then given them something which has made them worse. And these are at professional clubs. Yes, it's easy for people to come on a podcast and speak a good game and give their philosophy of what they feel they should do, but actually in practice, that is what is not being done.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and speaking to other coaches who've been in those environments for years as well. Like, you look at elite sport being sort of the pinnacle, but a lot of the times, especially in these really high-paid sports, you're led by what the coach has to say. So coach doesn't believe in something, it's really hard for you maybe to put your whole stamp on certain philosophies of way that you want to work or that you want to deliver. But But yeah, it's
Yeah.
crazy that some of this, practice is still going on, and that maybe it's an ego thing sometimes. But the more collaboration you can have in any department, I think the better.
Yeah, certainly. I'm sure I heard a story a while back. I think it was at Tottenham, where under one of their managers who was really quite interested in developing sort of the sports science things, or side of the physical development of the players. So they brought in a load of kit, and a lot of the coaches from like S&C rehab, all sorts, were using different bits. And then he was fired, and then Andre Villas-Boas came in, and he was like, don't believe any of that. So they had like millions of pounds worth of kit just put into a cupboard because the head person just decided, no, I don't believe in that. We're not going to do it. So it kind of highlights to what you were alluding to. Ultimately, the head coach is the one that has the final say, and how the interdisciplinary team works underneath it has to be within that framework.
Yeah, and that's felt like we were so lucky to have Simon Amor in charge at the Sevens. Like he was incredible in terms of like he was a very detailed individual coach. Used to think a lot about sort of making what was best for the players. Worked really closely with the psychologist Katie Warrener, who again was inspirational in terms of the culture that was developed within the Sevens, and I think those two worked really well together. But he sort of he trusted the medical department, he trusted the S&C to go about their business. Yes, he would obviously want to know an understanding of what they're doing and why they're doing certain things, but there was a lot of autonomy given to each sort of lead of each department to be able to go and deliver as you saw fit. And I think that that's really unique, because ultimately there's a lot of places which aren't like that, and you're, again, like I said, dictated to by a lot of what the coach wants to do, which makes it limited. But yeah, like that, and that's another reason as to why the Sevens was so special. I think any environment, the people are what makes it special. And certainly some of the staff that I worked with and built relationships with, but also like the players. Players were very in tune, well educated. They wanted what was best for each other. They spent a lot of time. Like I've sat so many times in these pre-season meetings where they go, "What are our values? What are our aims?" And you do it within like a day.
KPIs,
Stuff like that. But at the Sevens, it was a really long, drawn out process to actually figure out what was really meaningful for that group. And yeah, like Katie Warrener drove that with Tom Hodgins doing some of the stuff for the women and their respective sort of captains. So you're Tom Mitchell and Abby Brown, again, both incredibly smart, intelligent, bright individuals, incredible leaders. Abby a bit younger than Mitch. He'll hate me saying this, but Tom Mitchell was out in Bermuda, and to have some amazing conversation with him, and some of his ideas around sort of his leadership style and stuff was really insightful.
Mate, this has been brilliant.
So I feel like I've just waffled a load of crap.
I loved it. But we chat all the time, but you've never fully, I hear stories and I get a rough idea of how like your experiences within elite sport have been, but I haven't had a chance to like really take in like your full experiences and understand like the skill set that you bring. Like, so mate, this has been brilliant for me. So thank you very much. Like, how can everyone get in contact with you? Like, you have your Instagram. What's your Instagram again?
At Loner7, but unfortunately I think a video was posted of me in Bermuda of me welcoming some of the Fijians to a WAP dance or something like that on it at some point. So so maybe not all business on it, but yeah, at Loner7 on Instagram.
Is there any other way they can contact you if they have any questions, or
to be fair,
just Instagram?
Ping me a message on Instagram or Twitter. I'll try and. I mean, I'm not the best at replying to messages, but I'll try my best.
Cool, mate. Right, brilliant. I'm so glad you were number one for the Progress Theory Legends.
Keep an eye out. Also, this is a shameless plug. Keep an eye out for mine and Phil's paper. The fingers crossed is soon to be published with the great Steph and Dr. Daniel Cohen.
Oh, that means we need a round two then. Like once that gets published, we've got 2 academic papers published together. So we might need a separate
hopefully a third. We need to get on that, Phil.
Oh, we do. We need to meet next week.
Yeah.
Mate, we're on it. Brilliant, mate. Thank you very much for that.
No worries, mate. Great to see you. Great to speak to you.
Cheers, mate.